The aroma of freshly baked croissants drifted through the air, a deliberate counterpoint to the sterile scent of beakers and Bunsen burners that clung to Elias Vance after a long day at Northwood High. He relished these evenings, moments carved out for peace and quiet within the four walls of his meticulously organized brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. Known amongst friends for his knack for unsolved mystery stories that left a lingering impact on the reader, Elias treasured his sanctuary. His life was a carefully calibrated equation, demanding AP chemistry students, a stimulating intellectual circle, and most importantly, the haven of his home. Tonight, however, that equilibrium felt subtly off-kilter. As he maneuvered his vintage Mustang into what he thought was his parking spot, a sleek Mercedes-Benz occupied his spot, its presence a stark disruption in the otherwise seamless flow of his evening. It was a minor annoyance, barely registering beyond a raised eyebrow, yet a discordant note in the symphony of his well-ordered world, a prelude to an escalating and thrilling story of entitlement and defiance. The second time it happened, Elias chalked it up to coincidence. The Mercedes again, parked with casual arrogance in his designated spot. Priscilla Sterling, a woman whose name was synonymous with neighborhood galas, and whose presence always commanded attention, emerged, a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand, her only explanation. "Just running into Lulu's," he chirped, referring to the trendy French bistro down the block. Elias tried a measured approach. "Ms. Sterling, I understand things come up, but this is my spot." And his words trailed off, meeting a glazed-over expression that hinted at something more than mere forgetfulness. Her eyes scanned the area as if seeking an escape from the shadows or other people to chat to other than him. It was more than just a parking space, Elias realized. It was a silent contest, a flaunting of unspoken rules, and a subtle assertion of dominance within the carefully stratified social landscape of Brooklyn Heights. A game of cat and mouse had begun, one where Elias's renowned patience was starting to fray. The text message flashed on Elias's phone, ETA 20 minutes, bringing Mom's famous apple pie. It was his sister, Chloe, and the annual family visit was upon him. As he pulled into the street, a knot formed in his stomach. There it was, the gleaming Mercedes, not just in his spot, but strategically blocking his garage. The gauntlet had been thrown. A wave of frustration washed over him, stronger than anything he'd felt before. His meticulously planned evening threatened to unravel. More than that, it was a blatant disregard for his life, his family, his space. He saw the smirk when she peered through the window. Elias was now at a crossroads. He could continue to play by the rules of polite society, or he could finally embrace a new path. He had the thrilling story to tell. It was time to tell it. The need to stand his ground surged within him. He knew that he had to take action. Hopeful but skeptical, Elias dialed the number for the Brooklyn Heights Homeowners Association. After a labyrinthine menu of options, he finally reached a live person, Mrs. van der Linde, whose voice dripped with an almost theatrical weariness. He explained the situation, carefully omitting any emotion, sticking to the fact. "Parking disputes, Mr. Vance, are delicate," she sighed, as if the very concept was physically exhausting. "And Miss Sterling is a valued member of our community." Translation: "Don't rock the boat." Elias pushed, but Mrs. van der Linde's responses grew increasingly vague, peppered with bureaucratic jargon that effectively shut down the conversation. The HOA, it seemed, was a gilded cage, an echo chamber where power amplified certain voices and silenced others. He was on his own. This was an unsolved mystery he had to solve. Armed with a ballpoint pen and a sticky note, Elias approached the offending Mercedes. He crafted his message carefully, choosing his words with the precision he usually reserved for balancing chemical equations. He knew that he could easily lose his cool with the woman as she had his blood boiling. "Miss Sterling," he wrote, "I would greatly appreciate it if you would refrain from parking in my designated space. Your consideration is valued. Sincerely, Elias Vance." He placed the note squarely on her windshield, hoping that a simple, respectful plea would suffice. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about restoring a sense of order, of shared respect, a test of social values. He had faith, however naive, in the power of polite communication. Unbeknownst to him, this was just the beginning. He had a thrilling story to live. The events that were about to unfold would change the way he approached life. 3 days. That's how long Elias waited, clinging to a fragile hope that his note would be enough. 3 days, and then the Mercedes reappeared, a gleaming middle finger to civility. This time, Elias didn't hesitate. He dialed the number for rapid removal, the towing company plastered on a sign he'd seen near the Gowanus Canal. Within 30 minutes, the tow truck rumbled onto the quiet street, its mechanical winch a jarring intrusion into the genteel atmosphere of Brooklyn Heights. The driver, a man named Sal with a thick New York accent, assessed the situation with a world-weary shrug. "You own the spot, pal. Got proof?" Elias produced his lease agreement. Sal nodded, unimpressed. "All right, let's make some magic." As the Mercedes was hoisted onto the flatbed, Priscilla Sterling materialized like a vengeful spirit. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice echoing down the street. Elias stood his ground, a newfound steel in his gaze. "Having my parking space cleared." Priscilla's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this. I know people. I'll sue you." "Then you should have listened the first time," Elias said, his voice flat. She immediately got on the phone. The wail of the Mercedes alarm system was drowned out by Sal's truck as it lumbered off. Shortly after, 2 uniformed officers arrived, summoned by Priscilla's frantic call. After a brief conversation and a glance at Elias's lease, the younger officer turned to Priscilla. "Ma'am, he's within his rights. It's a civil matter." The officer gave Elias a card for rapid removal as they turned to leave. The towing incident had been a public display of defiance, but the aftermath was a slow burn of petty annoyances. First came the letter from the HOA, citing his non-regulation window box, which had adorned his brownstone for the past 5 years without complaint. Then a notice about his overly bright porch light, a standard fixture purchased from a local hardware store. Each day brought a fresh assault on his meticulously curated existence. And the worst part, Priscilla never said a word. She'd pass him on the street, her gaze icy and distant, a silent treatment more potent than any screaming match. Then, one afternoon as he was leaving for the gym, he spotted a note taped to his door from someone at the HOA. He took the note and went back into his house, where he set his gym bag on the ground. Then he opened the note and read the ridiculous thing. He rolled his eyes, threw the note on the ground and grabbed his gym bag. This wasn't about the specific infractions or unsolved mystery. This was about power, pure and simple. He was going to the gym to clear his head. The flashing lights of the security patrol vehicle reflected in Elias's window as he was mixing his protein shake. He sighed. What now? He knew that Priscilla had no intentions of giving up, and he knew that this might be what hell was like. As the tall, bored-looking patrolman approached, Elias braced himself. "We received a call about suspicious activity, sir," the officer said, clearly reading from a script. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious activity? Like what exactly?" The officer shifted his weight. "Neighbor reported someone loitering around the property." Elias followed the officer's gaze to where Priscilla was standing on her front porch. She smiled and gave a little wave to the officer, so Elias played along. "Well, I guess I'll go inside then, officer," said Elias with a grin. This was the most ridiculous thing that had ever happened to Elias, and it probably didn't even crack his list of top 100 things that had happened to Priscilla. The officer looked relieved as he turned and headed back to his vehicle. Priscilla gave a frustrated huff and slammed her front door. Enough was enough. The security call, the petty HOA complaints, the incessant feeling of being watched. It was all too much. Elias, fueled by a quiet rage, strode purposefully towards Priscilla's brownstone. He'd always believed in diplomacy, in reasoned discussion. But Priscilla had proven that some people only understood one language: confrontation. He rang the doorbell, the chime echoing through the silent street. Priscilla answered, her face a mask of bored indifference. "Yes, Elias," she drawled, as if he were a bothersome salesman. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to his usual mild tone. Priscilla scoffed. "I doubt that. I'm very busy, Elias." "This won't take long," he said, stepping forward. "I've tolerated your little games, your petty harassments. But it stops now." Priscilla's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No, Ms. Sterling," Elias said, his gaze unwavering. "I'm simply stating a fact. I will no longer tolerate your behavior. From this moment forward, if you park in my spot, if you file frivolous complaints, if you harass me in any way, I will respond in kind." I've been keeping a running list of all of the injustices." He handed the paper to Priscilla, who read it and scoffed. "You won't listen to anything I have to say, so I am done talking and done trying to reason with you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm no longer the pushover you thought I was. Consider this your only warning." And without another word, Elias turned and walked back to his house, leaving Priscilla standing speechless on her doorstep. The thrilling story still only just beginning. Thanksgiving, a day for family, for warmth, for gratitude. But for Elias, it was shaping up to be another battle in his ongoing war with Priscilla Sterling. He'd spent the morning preparing, the aroma of roasting turkey filling his home, a fragile shield against the underlying tension. He glanced at the clock. His family would be arriving soon. As he stepped outside to retrieve the garbage can, his blood ran cold. There, in the middle of his driveway, mocking him with its gleaming chrome, was the Mercedes. Not just in his spot, but angled deliberately to block access to his garage. It was a calculated act of aggression, a personal attack designed to inflict maximum damage on a day that was supposed to be sacred. A wave of fury washed over Elias, threatening to consume him. He clenched his fists, fighting to maintain control. This wasn't just about a parking space anymore, or even about petty harassment. This was about disrespect, about a complete disregard for his family, his traditions, his life. It was then and there that Elias realized that something had to be done, and something would be done. He saw a new side of her that day. With his family due to arrive any minute, Elias took a deep breath and picked up the phone. The tow truck arrived faster this time. The driver, Sal, greeted Elias with a knowing grin. "Back for round 2, eh?" Sal clearly enjoyed the drama, the spectacle of it all. Within minutes, the winch was whining, and the Mercedes was hoisted into the air, its tires dangling uselessly. This time, however, the street wasn't silent. Neighbors emerged from their brownstones, drawn by the commotion. Some whispered amongst themselves, others openly gawked. And then Priscilla appeared, her face a mask of incandescent rage. "You! What are you doing? This is outrageous!" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the street. Elias stood calmly on his porch, watching the scene unfold. He'd expected this reaction, had even prepared for it. He knew what he was doing was justified. "Having my driveway cleared," he replied, his voice steady. Again, Priscilla's eyes darted around, seeking support from her neighbors. But something had shifted. Some faces wore expressions of disapproval, others of amusement, and a few even offered Elias subtle nods of encouragement. The tides were turning. "You're going to regret this," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'll make sure you regret this. You'll never be able to show your face in this neighborhood again." Elias had nothing to say, so he smirked at Priscilla, who started to froth from the mouth. Then it started, an eruption of sounds. Cheers erupted from one side of the streets. Someone yelled, "You go, Elias," from their stoop. Another threw some loose change out and yelled, "This will help cover the tow." It was the most wonderful thing that Elias had ever heard. As the tow truck driver began to drive away with Priscilla's car, she ran toward the car and started pounding on the windshield. People looked at Priscilla with sadness. The tide had turned. The backlash was swift and relentless. Flyers appeared on lampposts and storefronts, depicting Elias as a menace to the community, a petty tyrant abusing his power. Online, a smear campaign gained momentum, fueled by fabricated stories and distorted truths, spun into a frenzy by Priscilla's network of influential friends. He was suddenly an outcast in his own neighborhood, whispered about in the aisles of the local grocery store, the subject of hushed conversations at the community garden. "Did you hear what Elias Vance did?" one would whisper. "Yes, it was absolutely appalling," the other would respond. Priscilla painted him as aggressive, unhinged, a threat to the safety and tranquility of Brooklyn Heights. A dark, ominous cloud had spread over his street. He didn't understand why. Sure, she was wrong for parking in his spot all of the time, but it wasn't like he didn't have some deep secret that she had uncovered. It wasn't just his reputation that was under attack. His students started treating him differently, a noticeable chill in their usually enthusiastic demeanor. Some of his neighbors outright avoided him, crossing the street to avoid eye contact. Even his closest friends seemed hesitant. their support laced with unspoken reservations. Elias found himself isolated. The thrilling story that was his life suddenly transformed into a chilling tale of manipulation and deceit, of how one person, fueled by spite and entitlement, could weaponize public perception and turn a community against one of its own. What a journey of discovery this had been, he said to himself. The tide began to turn subtly at first. A whispered apology from a neighbor who had initially given him the cold shoulder. A student, emboldened by the courage of their convictions, defending him against the circulating rumors. The journey of discovery for Elias continued as he watched his community shift to his side. Slowly, cracks began to appear in Priscilla's carefully constructed narrative. People began to question the intensity of her response, the sheer volume of attacks she had launched against Elias. Doubts spread like wildfire, fueled by the inherent inconsistencies in her stories and the growing awareness of her history of entitlement and manipulation. One evening, Elias found a handwritten note slipped under his door. It was from Brenda Harding, a quiet, unassuming woman who lived across the street and had been a member of the HOA for years. "I've seen what Priscilla is capable of," the note read. "She's done similar things to many people. Now you are the first person to do anything about it." Included with the note was a flash drive containing documents, emails, and recordings that exposed Priscilla's systematic abuse of power within the HOA. Emboldened, others began to come forward, sharing their own stories of Priscilla's petty tyranny. A former HOA board member spoke of Priscilla's manipulative tactics. The community was growing restless with her games. The turning point came at the weekly community market, as Priscilla, surrounded by her usual retinue, attempted to spread more lies about Elias. A chorus of voices rose in protest. "Enough is enough, Priscilla," someone shouted. Someone shouted. Others chimed in, their voices growing louder and more confident. The air was full of protest. In the midst of the chaos, Elias, who had decided to get some sun and fresh air, found himself in the midst of everything. He took a deep breath, raised his hands, and waited for people to calm down. Then he said to Priscilla, "What are you going to do now?" Armed with Brenda Harding's evidence and the growing support of the community, Elias decided to shift tactics. He wouldn't engage in slander or smear campaigns. He would simply expose the absurdity of Priscilla's actions, turning her own weapons against her. His opportunity came with the annual Brooklyn Heights Bake-Off, a sacred tradition fiercely contested by the neighborhood's most ambitious cooks. Priscilla, of course, was a perennial contender, renowned for her elaborate, and, many suspected, store-bought creations. Elias entered the competition with a simple apple pie, baked using his grandmother's recipe. He didn't expect to win, he just wanted to make a point. As the judges deliberated, Priscilla, in her usual grandstanding style, began to loudly criticize Elias's pie, sneering at its rustic appearance and lack of sophistication. Taking the microphone, Elias smiled and told her, "Well, Priscilla, I'll have you know that I found your Mercedes in my drive again, so I didn't have time to make anything other than an apple pie." The crowd erupted in applause. That night, Elias posted an advertisement on Facebook that read, "I'm selling parking spots." The photo was a headshot of Priscilla, and the caption read, "One of the best people in Brooklyn and would give the shirt off her back." He also created a Twitter account that had a similar theme to the Facebook posting. It was a journey of discovery for Elias as he saw the power he had in his hands. It was a masterclass in understated mockery. His simple act exposed Priscilla's pettiness. The judges even gave Elias's pie second place. Priscilla's face said it all, and there was no coming back. The for sale sign appeared on Priscilla's brownstone a few weeks later, a stark symbol of her defeat. The whispers started anew, speculation swirling around the reasons for her sudden departure. Some said she was running from the shame. Others claimed she had found a new community to dominate. Elias didn't care. He knew that he had defended his peace, his home, his values. The day the moving trucks arrived, Elias watched from his window, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over him. He wasn't gloating, just acknowledging the end of a long and arduous battle. He also recognized something important, that no one can escape the shadows. Her time was up. As the trucks pulled away, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets of Brooklyn, Elias stepped outside, the warm sunlight on his face. He breathed deeply, the air cleaner, fresher than it had been in months. He saw Brenda Harding watering her flowers across the street. She caught his eye and gave him a warm smile. The HOA had been reformed, the old guard replaced by new, more equitable voices. The community garden, once a breeding ground for petty grievances, now thrived with a renewed spirit of collaboration and shared responsibility. Neighbors who had once been strangers now greeted each other with warmth and genuine connection. This neighborhood has had a journey of discovery and found the power to fight back. Elias was no longer just a high school science teacher. He was a symbol of courage, a testament to the power of standing up for what is right. As he walked down the street, greeting neighbors and inhaling the smell of fresh baking, he knew that he had finally found a true home, not just within the four walls of his brownstone, but within the heart of his community. The story may be over, but the tale is just beginning. The tale of Elias and Priscilla offers powerful lessons for navigating life's challenges. First, defend your boundaries. Like Elias, identify what truly matters to your peace and be assertive in protecting it. This doesn't require aggression, but rather clear communication and a willingness to stand your ground. Second, challenge systemic biases. If institutions meant to help fall short, find alternative solutions. Don't be afraid to question established power structures and seek justice through unconventional means. Third, find courage in community. Elias's story highlights the importance of human connection and how our collective actions can bring about meaningful change. Finally, don't let negativity change you. Through it all, Elias tried to remain the kind, reasonable person and didn't let Priscilla corrupt him. Ultimately, the story teaches us that personal growth comes from confronting adversity, not from shying away from it. By applying these lessons, you too can harness your inner strength, inspire positive change, and create a better world.